Good morning. Jane and I are going to show you how to mount 2 to 3 prints from the first module of the IMCP for your final InDesign assignment. We want you to mount them on 15 by 20 boards. The parent size sheet for these is 32 by 40. Most of us don't have something large enough to cut these, so wherever you're buying them, they'll either cut them for free or they'll charge you a nominal fee. And you can go in together to get 4 out of a sheet, because again, 2 to 3. What we don't want you to purchase, is the crescent board that has just a black face, but unfortunately it has a white back. So you want to make sure you get all black all the way through. And there's 2 reasons for this. 1, this is not so attractive, but 2, if you make a mistake, you get a second chance without having to pay more money. So we'll cover that later. The board itself actually has a front and a back, and one's just a little bit blacker, and sometimes the curve of the sheet helps indicate that. So you should mount your assignment finished product on the front, and we'll talk about how to center that. And then your statement of purpose, and this is just a little sample, is going to go on the back. And you're done. So we're going to go through the steps of how to mount it, the easiest way, and the tools required. You want to have some surface, this is a Borco mat, that is kind of self-healing, because if you cut a lot of times on cardboard, when you're cutting your print trim border off, it tends to track in those cuts and you won't get a straight cut. Plus, this will protect your grandmother's table, which your mom or you might really want to have no cuts in later. So always cut on some protective surface. If you don't have one and don't want to buy one, you can go and just get a pad of paper, which we're going to use for protecting the area we're going to spray to mount, and you can use the back to cut on. So it's dual purpose, and we'll get into this in a little bit. You're going to need some tape to position once you know where your print's going to go. And there are 2 ways to mount prints typically. One is to have equal distance, and in this case the border would ultimately be trimmed off, on both sides and top and bottom. Another way to do it is to have 3 sides equal with heavier mat weighted at the bottom, which helps anchor the piece. So it's your choice. That's totally personal preference. You're going to need a nice straight edge. Don't use a piece of wood. Why? Well, if you cut against the wood, you're going to lose your straight edge. So steel ruler of some sorts, or a steel edge. And this particular ruler is pretty inexpensive. It's like $12, pretty cheap, from Michael's. It has a cork back, and when you're cutting, you would think you would just set it down and cut with the cork down. The problem with that is your cutting edge can dip underneath and then cut into your material, which you don't want. So in the cutting phase, make sure you turn the ruler over if it has some kind of cork backing. If there's no cork, either side would work. Questions? Oh, just kidding, you can't guess a question. Finally, you've probably seen number 11 X-Acto knife blades. They're pretty expensive, and if you have a handle, it's not as bad, but you can get maybe 15 for, I'm going to guess, maybe 15, 20 bucks. The good news is, and I learned this from people who worked in the film departments of print shops, they use single-edge razor blades. You can get a whole box of 100 for about 8 bucks, and if you chip the tip on a number 11, you've got to get a new blade. If you chip the tip on a single edge, you got the other end. So twice as many blades, because you can use both edges, and you get 100 for $8. So you can go in together on these, and they do have a little safety wrap. So I tend to wrap them back up afterwards so that they don't rust. So the things you have to do before we get going is we want to trim the white border off, and then we're going to calculate how to mount the piece. When you're cutting, and this is pretty dirty, so I'm going to protect it with another piece of paper so that I don't transfer any of this stuff. It's just dried paint. And when you cut, you're going to have to cut from the front surface so to know where to cut from. And when you cut, you want to cut so that the paper or the artwork is protected by the ruler. So if you're like this and you're cutting and you slip away, you're only going to go into the area that's trimmed off. If you were to cut it the other way, which I don't think anybody would do, if you slip doing it this way, you're still on the right line, but when you slip, you're going to destroy your artwork. So if you make a mistake, what I do is I always print 2 so that I have a backup, because the printing may not be occurring where the mounting's going on. So that's just my little safety. So I'm going to go ahead and trim these sides off. And when you're trimming, you don't have to be Hercules or Atlas. You just want to do a series of light cuts, because the blade will tend to track. If you try and do it in one cut and you slip, you could cut yourself and it would be deep. If you're cutting lightly, it's not going to be as deep as a cut. And you just keep cutting till you're through the material. It's just a series of light touches. And I'm using the blade and see it's kind of stuck on one edge. So just one more pass and I'm all done. So I'm going to repeat that for the other sides. I do want to show you one thing, because I did make a mistake. And that is, with the brand new blade, even if you over trim, so I have a little white here, you can shy trim that off, particularly with a really sharp blade, and just line it up and take your time, and you can clean up that edge and no one will ever know. And the reason we do that is that white area, because it's different than the whole green, is going to become an eye trap, and then when someone sees it, it's going to take away from the impact of the entire piece. So once you're all cut out, I'm going to show you my great trick of measuring, because it's really hard to measure a random width to a specified distance. Now this could be pretty close, but it may not be. So we are 15 inches if they trimmed it properly, and they didn't. So it's shy by a 32nd, which makes the math pretty hard. And our print itself is also shy of 7.5. So even though we told the dimensions to be correct for the assignment, it's still not going to work. So this is my little trick. I just put the print to one side, and then I take one of my trimmings, and I'm going to use geometry instead of measuring, and that distance is turned out coincidentally to be this white piece of paper. If I fold it in half, I now have a place to mark to center it side to side. So that's my new measurement. So does that make sense? So by just using this, you could measure. It's going to be difficult. If you feel you don't like this technique, what I recommend is trying to split a distance of approximately, get this kind of close, 7 7/16. It's really hard to divide that in half. So what I do is I take the ruler and I turn it to an even number that will span, like 8. So then, since we're on the diagonal, if we mark 4, we split the distance, and it's much easier than trying to measure what half of 7 7/16 is, which I'm not even going to try and calculate. So those are two techniques. Whichever one works better for you, do that. So we just have to repeat that measurement for our top and bottom. Or, if you're going to go 3 sides equal, you're all done. You've got your 3 measurements all set. So we need to mark this, but we don't want to mark it so it's permanent, because if we erase it, it makes the board shine, or the pencil marks are going to stay. So what I do is I use tape just to measure where I'm going to put my finished piece. And you can spend a lot of money for drafting tape, or you get to make your own with regular masking tape. So cheap masking tape, go on some cotton pants shirt, pick up a bunch of lint, and now you have your very own low-tack tape. So super easy, super cheap. So we're going to mark where this has to go, because we're going to have guidelines. So we're going to use the tape to set up where the print's going to end up. And what I do is I only do 3 points, because it's really difficult to cheat a triangle. You can cheat a square. I'm going to do 2 points on the long dimension, 1 on the top. If it hits all 3 of those, it's perfectly square to its sheet. So let's do that. So measure our top. And make your tape somewhere so that it has enough to hit the print when you get centered side to side. So 3 pieces of tape. And ultimately these come up. And don't burnish really hard. This is just for reference. So 1 there. Just kind of touch it. We're going to get our other measurement for this side. So the bottom's correct, so we'll mark that one. And then we're going to come back and mark the top one. And since we're marking 2 on this side to make it parallel, we're all set. And I'm just a little bit off, so a little correction. Cool. You are good to go. And that's it. Look, no pencil lines, all set up. So that's pretty much part 1 all done. The second part is we want to spray this with spray mount. We don't want to drown it, and I'm going to show you a couple of tricks of how to know if it's the right dryness so that it can be repositioned but won't fall off. Too dry, it'll fall off later. Too wet, it'll stick, and you can't position it. Again, whatever works for you, you're going to go with. This is what works for me. Just do a little test to see where I am. And the nozzle's right, so first pass, stop, halfway down, overlap, stop. And then just follow it up. And I tend to wait in case there's a drift. That's it. Then to protect this, just turn it upside down and clear the nozzle, and you'll hear it run out. So then there's going to be no goo in there to dig out later. And we're just going to let this dry. And the test to know if it's ready is the back of the finger test. If you use your fingertips or pads, the oils on your hands give you a false read whether it's dry or not, because the oils prevent it from sticking. So back a finger, if it sticks and you lift the page, too wet. So it's just a little tack, and if you wait 30 minutes, it's going to be too dry and you won't be able to mount it. So you're just going to have to stay on top of it. So it's sticking to me, so that means it's too wet. This. And then take your page, flip it over, stick it to itself, and you have a brand new work surface for your next print. So let's go back inside and finish this up. Okay, welcome back. So we're ready to mount. So again, you don't want to set this down with the glue side anywhere because you're never going to get it up. So just take your time, put it on a surface, get your board, it's all set up, good to go. And again, try and keep your workspace clean, just like that desktop in the computer lab. This is our real desktop. It's just going to be good if you don't have things in the way. So one thing to remember is if we want 3 sides equal, we don't want to mount it this way. So when you're in a hurry, if you're waiting to the last minute, if you mount it upside down, it's going to be a hard sell. So just take your time. And then again, we just have to line those 3 edges, 2 on one side, 1 on the other. And because it's still not dry, we can kind of set it down. So that's great. We're going to take our little tabs, and don't yank them even though it's low tack because you could tear the fibers. There are ways to fix that, but it's better just to do it with a little finesse. And you don't have to get rid of these. You can use these a lot, and you can just stick them on your ruler. That's a great place to store them. When you're putting content down, if you tack it in the center first, you run the risk of having a bubble. But if you let it fall on a diagonal and just kind of wipe, let me turn this, you just kind of wipe diagonally, you're just working that surface out. You won't have any bubbles. It's not totally adhered. You could still pop it to reposition it. The final thing is you have to burnish it to really make that adhesive stick. That's where our extra piece of paper comes in. We're going to protect our surface. And you could use any, like a butter knife, anything that has an edge that you can put a little pressure. And if you didn't protect it, you're going to put a scar in the surface. So this is just going to help anchor that stuff down. And this will never ever come off. Of course, there's always an exception, so we'll get to that next. So you're all done. That looks pretty nice. In the mounting process, don't put your name on the front. It's going to be on your statement on the back. So if you did a statement with no name, make sure you reprint it with your name. And this is dual fold. It helps identify your piece, and it gives a little explanation in case the viewer, in this case a judge or one of your instructors, doesn't understand what you're trying to do. So that helps sell it. To store your pieces, this is best practice. So all art goes face to face, and the next one's going to be back to back.